So today we're going to talk about cloud marketplaces. So you're in the right room if you came for that. And there's a lot of nuance. This is like the hottest way to drive revenue growth. But there are a lot of technical and legal aspects to take into consideration. So we're going to touch on the most common questions we get, both from the go-to-market side as well as the legal side of the house.
Right.
And we're going to leave some time after if you have any questions to ask us. So we want to make this interactive. We're going to ask you a lot of questions, so please raise your hands and tell us where you are in your cloud journey.
Okay. So the first question that I have for Juhi is, what are cloud marketplaces and how are they transforming the B2B software landscape?
So cloud marketplaces are essentially a meeting place for software vendors, for solutions providers, and the customers they're hoping to sell to. They've gotten really, really hot recently because these cloud providers sell to enterprise customers, they sell to regulated industries, and these are places that all of our favorite SaaS companies are trying to reach as they move more upstream. So I think cloud marketplaces are going to be the future. They've suddenly gotten really hot. And the key players that people talk about are usually Microsoft, Amazon, and Google.
Right. And when we say Amazon, we were talking about AWS.
AWS, thank you for calling that out.
And as the companies are moving into the cloud marketplace, how does this help them with the procurement deployment?
Yes. So cloud marketplaces have several key benefits, one of which is procurement, as Miya called out. So a lot of times deals die because they get stuck in procurement. You're trying to get through the legal paperwork. There's a lot of redlining. Sorry, Miya. And frankly, enterprise customers like standard language. So cloud marketplaces actually require you to use their standard paper, which is amazing because it's been pre-vetted, pre-approved by legal teams, by other teams. So when you transact through marketplace, it's basically like buying an app in any app store.
Well, the legal review process may not be quite as intense, shall we say. So I think it also gives the business leaders more discretion in how they're going to solve their problems without having to vet every part of the process through legal.
Exactly. And standard terms again, so you can't really redline it too much. But I think you're going to help us talk about how we work around that.
Yes.
So Miya, from a legal standpoint, what are the key considerations that companies should keep in mind as they enter cloud marketplaces?
So I think, first of all legal agreements can have a similar framework, right? And when we talk about companies that are coming into the cloud marketplace, we're talking about companies with intellectual property, technology. And one of the primary concerns, as always, is going to be data privacy and security. And that is you're going to hear me say that multiple times today. When you talk about data privacy and security, you're also talking about the jurisdictions. So how many people here are dealing with data in Europe? Okay, I see a couple hands. So you don't know actually where all of your data is actually touching sometimes. So it's not just where your customers are coming from, but where your data is flowing. And our data is flowing across boundaries, across our geographical boundaries of our countries. The data doesn't care, right? And so when you are working with other vendors who are helping you to process, store, doing whatever they're doing with your data, the question is, where are their servers? Where are they pushing your data? Because if you start touching in these other jurisdictions, then you are responsible for compliance. And you need to know what's happening. And even in the United States, our favorite state, California. So, be sure you know what is happening with your data and that you have the proper notices, disclosures, and compliance mechanisms in place. And that you are communicating it clearly with your clients. You're telling them where you're going to collect, what you're going to collect, how you're going to store it, process it, share it. And it matters for your enterprise clients, your small business and mid-sized businesses, but think about it from an individual perspective. Those businesses are handling individual data as well. What do you want to see? How do you want your data protected? You wouldn't ask anything less, right? And so it's not just about your big company clients. It's about the individuals that they're serving as well, and being able to clearly communicate that information so that they can clearly communicate it to their clients. And I'm going to say that a lot. A lot of this is about expectations and clear communication. And then how are you going to safeguard against a data breach? It's going to happen. You're going to be breached. Someone in your stream is going to have a breach of some sort. How are you going to safeguard against that? What's going to be your recovery plan? What's going to be your communication plan for that? That's really, really important when you're talking about all this data. And then your IP rights. Protect your IP, don't infringe on others. I mean, I think that's pretty obvious. Once we get past that, then understand the marketplace's terms and conditions. And when I say understand it, I'm not kidding. I sometimes barely understand it. And I read these things. I don't enjoy it, but I can read them. Can you understand it? Because if you can't, then you have to ask me or another attorney to help you understand. I'm going to assume that you do understand many parts of the T&Cs unless you ask me questions. I'll go over it with you, but I'm going to assume that you understand what certain words mean, what certain phrases mean. So ask your attorneys. Make sure you really do understand what it is you're obligating yourself to, and the effect it has on your IP ownership, the licensing, your distribution, the territories that you're going to be able to use to market and distribute in, and then actually monitor and enforce those IP rights. Okay? And then the last is liability and indemnification. We don't like to talk about it. We all have car insurance. We all have homeowners insurance or renter's insurance. Indemnification to help us from our potential liabilities is really important, and it is no less so in this case. And so the question is, who is responsible? Understand that when you're looking at your T&Cs. Figure out how you're going to flow that down to some of your other vendors, to the other partners that you're working with. Don't accept liability that you really can't control. You really want to be aware of those factors, and you want to look, when we look at indemnification means I'm going to be in place of you, as a way to talk about that, right? So you get in a car accident, your insurance company is going to stand in the place of you. It's an easy way to kind of understand this. And they're going to be responsible. Well, you're signing so many agreements with those that you're working with to create your software solution, those you're working with to implement, and then those on your reseller partner side. Map out where your liability really is. You have so many agreements that you're party to. What have you agreed to from a universal perspective? And rarely do people look at that. Even my own clients, they don't necessarily want to spend the money on that. So it is important, because then you know where your true liabilities lie and what you've been able to push to other parties and what you still hold on to. And when you look at it from a risk management perspective, that's really important. And I promise it's going to be like the longest part that I speak, because everything else is going to be a rehash of this.
But that's really important for multi-party deals, which are getting more and more relevant in marketplaces, and we can touch on that. So thank you for calling that out.
It's understanding the whole universe of your agreements. And moving from there, Juhi, what has the role of cloud marketplaces evolved to for the B2B space over the past few years?
Yes. So going way back in our time machine, back when cloud marketplaces were launched, no one wanted to adopt them. We had to beg people to adopt them. And we'd get asked questions like, well, how many monthly active users do you have? Can you share some statistics? And the answer was cough, cough, no, because we just started. However, that's changed dramatically now. It went from being basically a vanity metric to say we're on XYZ marketplace to being a necessity for co-selling with these hyperscalers. So what's happened today is that companies like Amazon, Google, Microsoft, they all require you to transact through the marketplace if you're going to speed up procurement, use their enterprise customers as monetary commitments, which means pre-committed budget, yay for the CRO, and if you're going to retire their seller's quota. If you retire a seller's quota, they're going to love you, and they're going to want to do more deals with you. So it's become basically a necessity in table stakes for selling with hyperscalers.
I hear revenue.
I hear revenue too, and I think everyone in this room cares about revenue. So We'll talk a bit more about the nuance of actually transacting. But till we get to that, how do partnership agreements typically change when you're dealing with these cloud-based hyperscalers? And
So-
what should people avoid?
So I think it goes down to basics. And I know I'm not talking to a room full of lawyers, so I'm going to go to the basics. Again, you need to understand your contract, read it, understand what you're reading. How many people here read their contracts? Okay, that's not all the hands, okay? How many of you that read them understand what you're reading? Yeah, like all the hands went down, okay? That's okay. But the question is, from my perspective, you're signing something. I want you to be able to understand it. So again, asking your team questions. And this goes to drafting. And I am not exempt from this problem. Our responsibility is to draft to protect our clients, right? But it also has to be understandable. Oh my gosh, that is not an easy balance. Because the language that has been vetted through the court systems is not user-friendly. But the language we understand doesn't provide full protection. And so what is that balance point? So as you are creating your own TNCs, it's really understanding how you can communicate clearly so there's no ambiguity and also protect and manage your risk. So legal is really risk mitigation. And you're really looking at what's happening to your IP, your data privacy, and your security again, right? And then the other jurisdictions that come into play when you start subscribing to these agreements. And then don't forget to customize. You're not just a passive player. So be sure that your TNCs overlay on the standards that you're having to adopt and agree to with your partner, but that you have your own layer that works for what your needs are. Okay? And the key here is that you can't have conflicting T's and C's, right? So really being able to look at them together so that if you need to make changes, you can do so on yours. You're not going to be able to change Microsoft's or AWS's, like they don't know who you are. And so really looking at your side of the equation, how can you make changes for you that benefit you and your stakeholders? And then Juhi can help talk to you about how to integrate those in those agreements from a linking perspective. My job is making sure that the clauses work, that the terms work. And then when you're negotiating these agreements, clear expectations. And this goes for any contract. I'm not even just talking about resellers and partner agreements. Clear expectations. What are the roles and responsibilities clearly delineated so that if you have a disagreement, it's really obvious what one party's supposed to do and what the other in terms of deliverables, in terms of execution and process. What are the dispute resolution mechanisms? What are the termination clauses? I mean, let's be honest. You're not always going to be a happy partnership. So if you have to dissolve that partnership, terminate that partnership, what does that look like? What happens if there's an involuntary dissolving of that partnership because one party has gone bankrupt, one party needs to dissolve for some reason? What happens to that IP? And so making sure that all those terms are baked in so you don't have to wonder, what if this happens? And that's the role of an attorney. We're extraordinary pessimists. And then the last is make sure that you're monitoring and enforcing your partnership agreements and all of the agreements in this universe so that they work. If you stop monitoring and enforcing, then you're not really keeping an eye on what is actually a huge asset.
So listen to your lawyer is my takeaway here.
Actually, it's hire an attorney.
Okay.
But,
Too good.
Juhi, could you share a success story of a company that effectively used a cloud marketplace to expand its business? So going from one business model to the other.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll share the story of a small security company, which is now pretty huge, but they were small when their VC introduced them to us. And by us, I mean I was at Microsoft. I was working with these high-growth startups. Their VC told them, you need to sell to enterprise. And they were doing 5-figure deals. They were selling to mid-market, small, medium customers, and they were all up on AWS. And we talked to them about the potential of leveraging the marketplace, of co-selling with Microsoft, and basically using the monetary commitments that enterprise customers have and not fighting for budget and using that to close really huge deals. So what the security company did was they migrated enough of their solution so they could be eligible for co-selling with Microsoft. They took all the tactical steps, they got transactable, they got co-sell ready, and then they closed their first seven-figure deal with an insurance company in, who wants to guess? Their typical deal cycle was 6 months. 2 months? Do I have any other numbers? Very close. It was 6 weeks. So lead to deal time was 6 weeks. And they went through the marketplace, usually dealing with insurance companies. I'm sure you know how painful it can be. Yes. It was seamless. They went, the AE for the account helped them create a private offer. They transacted through the marketplace, and that was the first of many seven-figure deals. And now that company, I think they raised like 100 million a couple of years ago, valued at over $1 billion. And a huge part of that growth was just understanding the potential of using someone else's channel, of using the marketplace and pre-committed budget. So it's really transformative. It's not just a myth, it's not a fairy tale, it's real.
I think that also speaks to their willingness to take a risk.
Very true, very true. And also having your VC strong arm you into it.
Yes.
So.
But I think the other part to that, which I'd love for you to touch on, is that they were able to leverage. They didn't have to do everything in-house, right?
No. They were able to use other companies to basically get them transactable. They were able to use other companies to create their marketing collateral. Because every cloud company has internal lingo, and they needed to speak in that company's terminology. So they were very clever about using resources, and they've just kept growing ever since. And they also use tools, we can touch on that later, but they use tools like Partner Tap, etc.
But leveraging what's available.
Exactly. Don't do it yourself.
Right.
And so, actually, what advice would you give to startups, to smaller companies looking to navigate all of these legal complexities of the marketplace?
Okay, so here's the new one. Understand your terms and conditions. As I said, it's going to be a rehash. I'm just going to say that one last time, and then understand the rules and policies that are in those, so you understand how you're allowed to sell your products and services, because they're going to have certain rules in place. So make sure you get those. How are you able to engage and interact with customers and handle customer disputes? Like, understand what their rules are so you can be in compliance with that. And that's, again, why I'm saying make sure you understand what you're signing up for, right? Because it might be different than your default practice. And understand how their terms and conditions are going to trickle down to your other relationships. So before you sign, you should have an index of your other agreements and be able to have gone through them, done your own internal due diligence to figure out, do I need to make amendments to any of these existing agreements so that we're all in compliance with this new set of terms and conditions, which is going to govern all of us and how we all are managing our different parts of this process. And so it's not just a standalone agreement. You have to make sure that you can amend the rest of yours too. And I don't think most people think about that, or at least not until later. And then protect your intellectual property. That's your asset. And I know everybody here knows to do that, but review your licenses and all the permissions that you have. Do you have the license, the right to use somebody else's IP in the cloud marketplace? Are there any restrictions? So make sure before you go sell in the marketplace that everything is tied up. And safeguard your IP, and don't think of it from just a legal perspective. Legal, I'm going to say, is last, because there's so much that you can do internally. You can encrypt, you can lock down, you can restrict access. So do those things first. Figure out how you're going to manage the IP that you have and safeguard it. And then let us know what we can do to add another layer for confidentiality, for restrictions on use, etc. But it starts with how you manage your data to begin with, or how you manage your IP, the things that are making your company valuable. Because I'm going to be honest, these are pieces of paper. Once it's out, it's out. I mean, the damage can be done. So think from an internal perspective, how are you going to mitigate your risk?
And a lot of things that companies hate dealing with is collections. You hate like going after people who aren't paying. Beauty of cloud marketplaces is they handle the billing for you. They handle collections for you. So if someone stops paying, they don't get your service anymore.
Get turned off.
It's turned off automatically. So that's a huge one.
And Juhi, what strategies have you found most effective for leveraging cloud marketplace to drive revenue and growth?
Before I answer that, would it be helpful for me to just share like my 5 steps to cloud marketplaces? Yeah, okay. So step 1, all of these cloud marketplaces want you to have their solution on their platform. So if you want to co-sell with Microsoft, please have an Azure solution. Ditto AWS, like a question we frequently get asked is, can I transact through Azure Marketplace if my solution's 100% on AWS? No, please don't. You'll get in trouble. You don't want to get your listing taken down. So step 1, be present on that platform. Step 2, you have to do something along the lines of getting co-sell ready. For each of these companies, it means different things. Usually it's creating a bunch of marketing collateral that speaks Microsoft, AWS, Google speak. And it basically trains their sellers how to talk about you to understand what you're doing. The next step is get transactable. All these companies want you to transact through their marketplaces and pull down their clients' monetary commitments and drive more consumption. So that's step 3. And step 4 is get to the point where their clients can pull down their budget with you. So in Microsoft lingo, I'm just going to use them as an example because I don't want to talk about all 3 clouds. Microsoft lingo, that means get Mac eligible. And the steps to doing that is get co-sell ready, get transactable, make sure you're on a list that's called Mac eligible, and then transact through Marketplace. And you can pull down that monetary commitment. And then the last step is get to the highest tier of co-sell you can. So obvious, you want to get to the highest points you can, but really with Microsoft, it's something called top tier co-sell status. And what that means is sellers get quota retirement for selling with you. And this year, Microsoft's letting anyone who's co-sell ready and transacting through Marketplace get that tier without doing like $4 million of transactions through the Marketplace. So is anyone co-selling with Microsoft today? Yes, Jen. So I hope you're top tier eligible and you're using all of those incentives and benefits, and we should talk after if you're not, because what this is going to do is next year, when that blanket approval goes away, hopefully you'll have done enough deals that you'll be eligible for that top tier status and continue to make friends with these AEs. Quota retirement for the win. So what strategies, I think was the question you asked me, have I found most effective for marketplace growth? So I won't say transactable. Kirby and I talked a great deal about that in our master class. But a huge piece of it is figuring out your ICP. Who are you selling to? Are you selling to enterprise, mid-market, SMC? Because there are usually sales teams aligned to these. Are you selling to different industries? Because again, there are sales teams aligned to these. Are you fine-tuning your marketing and messaging? Because those are all things you should be doing so that when sellers hear certain terms, they'll think, aha, it's that ISV I need to pull into this deal. The other step is make sure you speak the language of cloud sellers. So all of them have their internal lingo. Like at Microsoft, we had an acronym, a TLA, for our 3-letter acronyms. And so that's kind of a joke, but not really. So make sure you're speaking their language, you're talking about the incentives you're eligible for, that the sellers are eligible for, and how you help them retire quota. That's huge. And another thing I think a lot of companies don't think about are the internal resources it takes to be successful. Like, who here is on the partner team, is responsible for partnerships? How many of you have the resources you think you need to be successful? No hands. That makes me sad. I mean, I think it's really important before you embark on a cloud journey to make sure your board is bought in, your C-suite is bought in, on having at least 2 years of runway to start selling with these companies, that they give you the headcount, the resources you need to be successful. So your marketing team needs to be bought in, your CRO needs to be bought in, enablement if you have a sales enablement team, RevOps, and it would be amazing if we all had resources for tools so that we could live not in spreadsheets, but in actual data-driven tools like, again, InPartner, PartnerTap, Partner Optimizer for figuring out which companies to actually partner with. So if you are planning to set up a cloud partnership, or if you're doing an SKO, you're walking into an SKO soon, think about what resources you need to actually help your partner team be successful. And by extension, your revenue teams be successful. And I'll get off. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
Well, and I'm going to piggyback off of that for a second. When we talk about language, how many here sell to highly regulated industries? Anybody? And your clients are defense contractors, hospitals, educational institutions. I mean, these are just some of the ones that come to mind. They have unique worries, anxieties, obligations. Be clear in your T&Cs that you meet those. I mean, that's part of selling, right? So your marketing information might have it. Do your T&Cs address it? Because if I'm the attorney for one of those companies, I'm going to look to make sure that you are at least not endangering us, but at the very least, hopefully helping us to appropriately manage that data and the data security, and that your protocols are in compliance with what ours need to be, so we don't have to have another layer, because who wants that? That's not helpful. It's more work, right? So think about who your customer is in terms of your legal documentation as well, and the words that you're using. So does everybody sell to enterprises? Okay, well, what about small businesses and mid-sized businesses? That's 90% of America. So are you selling from the businesses that might only do $50 million in business, or that's part of your target? They may not have the same robust legal team that you're going to find at a major hospital system. So when they're reviewing your information, can they understand it? Can the people who are making the decisions get through most of that process without bringing in their attorneys? Because they don't have the budget to bring in their attorneys. The in-house attorneys may or may not be the people reading it. They may or may not have in-house attorneys. So think about it from a communication and a friction perspective. If it's between you and another party, and I'm the one buying, and I can understand party A, but not party B's information, who am I going to go with? I mean, we want to talk about friction. It's not just in your sales process. It's in your review process.
Back to procurement, which is why it's so great to transact through these marketplaces and avoid all of that stuff.
Right.
Which is painful.
Right.
None of us have time for.
You want to make sure that all your layers are communicating the right language to your customers.
And so I think we're coming up in time, but I did want to ask you a last question. What steps should companies take to protect their IP and their confidential info?
So I'm going to talk about not strictly legal stuff, internal audit and classification of your IP. It helps you to more explicitly protect your IP because you know what you're protecting. And I'm not just talking about your software coding. I'm talking about your brand, your trademarks, trade secrets, whatever that might be, customer list. If you can relay that information to me more accurately, then I can make sure the agreements actually cover what you're wanting them to cover. Otherwise, I'm working with a little bit of ambiguity here, hence the legal language nobody likes to read. And have training programs for your employees. So when you sign these agreements, come up with a cheat sheet of what the responsibilities are for some of these employees. What can they do? What can they not do? And train them. Give them the education that they need so that they can help to execute and be in compliance. And review this periodically. So have training set up for every 6 months or 9 months so that you're pulling everybody back in and reminding them of what needs to happen. We forget. We have a lot of stuff going on, right? It's normal people. So bring it to the front and center of their minds so that it's easier for you. And then monitor and audit what's happening so you can implement systems to protect your IP, to be in compliance with these agreements. And don't get carried away. And it's really easy to get carried away. If you were to ask me from a legal perspective, I'd say, oh my gosh, monitor everything, right? Do you care, because of the way your deal is structured, how many licenses, how many people are actually using each license? Because if you don't, if that's really not important, it may not be worth creating a huge system to monitor and enforce that when there's no benefit to it. And so think about from a cost benefit perspective, from a business analysis perspective, what are you monitoring and analyzing and enforcing, and why? And it doesn't mean that you don't care about the terms of your agreement. It just is a difference in how you're going to expend your corporate energy so that you're having the most value from your processes. I mean, the typical example is don't spend $1 million to swat away a fly. I mean, that's just ludicrous. So, same philosophy.
And also, as a closing note, scale. These marketplaces are all about scale, about accessing global companies, different regions, different segments. So if you aren't already thinking about how to leverage whichever cloud you're built on, their marketplace, I would strongly encourage you to do so, because there are a ton of incentives out there. For example, this year alone, with Microsoft again as my example, you could get about $200,000 in cash back to you for transacting through the marketplace. So they're really trying to push companies to adopt that. And it's a virtuous cycle. You spend more, you drive more consumption, everyone wins. So go sell. And thank you for coming to our talk this afternoon.